About 5 months ago, I was driving across Oregon for work. Nothing exciting. Just a long drive, a few small towns, and way too many hours behind the wheel. Around sunset, heavy rain started coming down. The roads became difficult to see, so I decided to stop for the night. About 20 minutes later, I found a small roadside motel. There was only one employee inside. He handed me my room key, looked at me for a few seconds, then quietly said, "If you can drive a little farther, I think you should." This happened last October. I work as a freelance photographer. Most of my jobs are pretty ordinary. Small businesses, hotels, real estate listings. Nothing very interesting. That week, I had finished photographing a resort outside Portland and needed to be in Northern California 2 days later. Instead of flying home first, I decided to drive. I actually enjoy long road trips. Driving gives me time to clear my head. I usually avoid highways whenever I can. The smaller roads are quieter. You pass little towns that most people never stop in. Old diners. Gas stations that look like they've been there forever. Places that don't even show up unless you zoom all the way in on a map. By late afternoon, I'd already been driving for almost 7 hours. I wasn't tired, just ready to stop. Then the weather changed. The sky became almost black. Rain started falling so heavily that even the trucks around me slowed down. The windshield wipers were moving as fast as they could. It barely helped. I checked my GPS. The next decent-sized town was still over an hour away. I didn't really want to keep driving. A few minutes later, I noticed an old motel sign. Half of the lights on it no longer worked. It simply read, Pineview Motel. The building itself looked old but maintained. Nothing looked abandoned. There were maybe 6 or 7 cars parked outside. The office window was glowing with warm yellow light. Honestly, it looked kind of comforting after driving through the rain. I pulled into the parking lot, turned off the engine. For a moment, I just listened to the rain hitting the roof of my car. Then I grabbed my backpack and walked inside. The office was small. There was an old coffee machine in the corner, a rack of local brochures, a faded map hanging behind the desk. The man working there looked to be somewhere in his late 60s. Gray hair, thin glasses. He was reading a paperback book until the bell above the door made him look up. He smiled politely. "Evening." I smiled back. "Do you have any rooms available?" He nodded immediately. "Just one." He slid a registration card across the counter. While I filled it out, he didn't say much, just normal questions. "One night?" "Yes." "Credit card?" "Yes." "Vehicle?" "Blue SUV." It felt completely ordinary. When I handed the form back, he looked down at it for a second, then looked at me. "You traveling alone?" "Yeah." He nodded slowly. Didn't seem surprised. He reached behind the desk, picked up an old metal room key. Not a key card, an actual key. He placed it on the counter. "Room 12. I thanked him and reached for it. That's when he spoke again. Not loudly, not dramatically, almost like he was thinking out loud. "If you aren't too tired." He paused. "I'd keep driving." I looked at him. "I'm sorry?" He gave a small smile. "I know the weather's bad, but if you can make it to the next town, I think you'd have a better night." For a second, I honestly thought he was joking. I even laughed a little. "You don't want customers?" He smiled again. "I didn't say that." I waited for him to explain. He didn't. The office became quiet. The rain outside somehow sounded louder. Finally I asked, Is something wrong with the motel? He shook his head. No. The rooms are clean. Everything works. So, then why shouldn't I stay? For the first time, he looked toward the front window, watching the rain. After several seconds, he quietly said, I've worked here a long time, and sometimes. He stopped, then gently pushed the room key a little closer to me. I think people sleep better somewhere else. That was it. No explanation. No strange expression. Nothing. He simply wished me a good night. I picked up the key, thanked him, and walked back out into the rain. As I unlocked room 12, I remember thinking the old man was probably just eccentric. The room looked exactly like every roadside motel room I'd ever stayed in. A bed, a small TV, a desk, a lamp beside the window. Nothing felt unusual. I set my backpack on the chair, closed the door behind me, and told myself I'd be gone first thing in the morning. I locked the door behind me, set my backpack beside the bed, and turned on the television. Nothing but local news. I watched for a few minutes before switching it off. The room was quiet. The kind of quiet you only notice when you're far away from traffic. I checked my phone. No signal. That wasn't unusual. I'd stayed in plenty of places where service was bad. I plugged my phone into the charger anyway. Then I looked out the window. The parking lot was almost empty. Rain was still falling. Most of the motel lights reflected off the wet pavement. It actually looked peaceful. I started feeling a little embarrassed for thinking so much about what the clerk had said. He was probably just an older guy who worried too much. I took a shower, changed into a t-shirt, and climbed into bed. I don't know how much later it was, but I woke up suddenly. Not because of a noise, just wide awake. It took me a few seconds to remember where I was. The room was completely dark except for the digital clock beside the bed. 2:18 a.m. I wasn't scared, just awake. I lay there for a minute hoping I'd fall back asleep. Then I noticed something. A soft light was coming through the gap in the curtains. It looked like headlights. I assumed another guest had just arrived. But after another minute, the light never moved. Curious, I walked over and pulled the curtain back just enough to look outside. A pickup truck was parked across the lot. Its headlights were on. The engine didn't seem to be running, just the lights. I couldn't clearly see inside because of the rain on the window. After a few seconds, the headlights switched off. The parking lot became dark again. I shrugged. Maybe the driver had finally gone inside. I closed the curtain. As I turned back toward the bed, I noticed something I was sure hadn't been there before. The room phone, the one sitting on the bedside table. Its small red indicator light was glowing. I picked up the receiver. Silence. No dialed tone. Nothing. I put it back. A few seconds later, there was a gentle knock. 3 slow knocks. Not on my door. On the wall behind the bed. I froze. The room next door was occupied. Maybe someone had bumped into the wall. It wasn't impossible. I listened. Nothing. Just the rain outside. I climbed back into bed, pulled the blanket over myself, and eventually, I fell asleep. The next morning, the first thing I noticed was that the rain had stopped. I got dressed, packed my backpack, and walked to the motel office to return the key. The rain had washed everything clean. The parking lot looked completely ordinary. For a moment, I almost laughed at myself. Maybe I really had let the old clerk get into my head. When I stepped inside, He looked up from the same book he'd been reading the night before. Morning. I placed the room key on the counter. He looked at it, then looked at me. You stayed. I smiled. Yeah. I'm still here. He nodded once. I'm glad. There was something about the way he said it. Not relieved. More like satisfied. I couldn't help asking, what was that warning about? He stayed quiet for a few seconds. Then he asked, did you sleep well? I thought about it. I woke up once. He didn't seem surprised. Did you hear anything? I remembered the 3 soft knocks. I heard something from the room next door. He slowly shook his head. There isn't a room next door. I frowned. What do you mean? He walked around the counter and motioned for me to follow him outside. We stopped in front of my room. He pointed toward the wall behind my bed. Room 12 is the last room in the building. I looked. He was right. On the other side of that wall, there wasn't another room, just an empty field stretching toward the trees. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I looked back at the wall, then at him. Then what did I hear? He gave the smallest shrug. I've stopped asking that question. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. I remembered the 3 knocks. Slow, evenly spaced, exactly where my bed had been. I looked back toward the room. The curtains were still closed. The lamp inside was still on. Everything looked normal. Too normal. I turned back to the clerk. So why do you keep renting that room? He gave a tired smile. Because nothing ever happens. I stared at him. He continued, people hear something, or see headlights outside. Sometimes they sleep through the whole night, but by morning, they always leave. I waited for more. There wasn't any. I thanked him, walked to my SUV, and started driving. About 20 minutes later, I stopped at a gas station for coffee. While I was paying, I casually asked the cashier if he'd ever heard anything about the Pineview Motel. He looked at me for a second, then said, the old one on Highway 18? Yeah. He nodded. My uncle used to stay there whenever he traveled. Nice place. I smiled. The clerk's a little strange. The cashier looked confused. What clerk? The older man. Gray hair. Glasses. He checked me in last night. For a few seconds. The cashier didn't say anything. Then he quietly replied. They closed the front desk months ago. The owner's been renting the rooms online. I don't think anyone works there anymore. I didn't answer. I just took my coffee, walked back to my car, and sat there for a long time. Maybe the cashier was mistaken. Maybe he was talking about another motel. That's what I told myself. But before pulling away, I opened the receipt that had been folded in my pocket since the night before. At the bottom, instead of an employee's name, there was only one printed line. Room 12. Paid in full. No date. No time. No motel address. Just those 3 words. I still keep that receipt in the glove compartment of my SUV. I don't know who checked me in that night, and I don't know who knocked on the wall. But one thing has changed. Whenever I'm driving late, and I see a small roadside motel, I keep going, even if it's raining.